Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The North Wind Descends, the Lord Hani Mysteries, Book 4 by N.L. Holmes, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Hani stood in the reception room of the vizier of the lower kingdom and wiped the sweat off his face with his arm. The dim, high-ceilinged hall was blessedly cool after the withering heat of the courtyard. At his side, his secretary Maya said uneasily, "What do you suppose the vizier wants to see you for, my lord?" "I have no idea, my friend. I've had precious little contact with Lord Renefer since he took office, except to send written reports. I think I've sort of slipped through the cracks of his notice since I've been working locally." Hani thought gratefully of his former direct superior, Lord Patames, who had managed to get him off the rolls of foreign postings. Alas, Patames himself, in disfavor with the king, was now stationed abroad at Azati and Dejai. "Maybe he wants to give you the gold of honor, eh, my lord?" Maya said sarcastically. Hani was no more in favor than his superior. His favor with the king had plunged after he'd only too successfully uncovered the mastermind of a series of tomb robberies 2 years before. "More likely he needs me to take the blame for some botch-up," Hani grinned. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Lord Nefer's secretary at the vizier's door. He tipped his head and said loftily, "The vizier of the lower kingdom will see you now." Hani took a deep breath and strode forward through the shadowy reception room and into an office luminous with the buffered glow from its high windows. The vizier sat on a fine chair on a dais. He was a rotund figure with a long kilt knotted across the chest and a thick neck full of gold that doubled his chins up. There was a sheen of sweat on his face. Hani folded in a formal bow, hands on his knees, and when he rose, Lord Renefer said in a high-pitched, weary voice, "The famous Hani, I thought I'd never meet you." "I'm honored by the summons, my lord." Hani was unsettled. Famous? This hyperbole augured nothing good. He tried hard to stay below the notice of the court. "Well, Tames isn't around to intercede for you, so we'll be seeing more of one another, I dare say, at least until a new High Commissioner of Foreign Affairs in the North is named." Renefer crossed his arms, which rested on the mound of his belly, and leaned back in his chair while Hani waited, curious about why the vizier had called for him. Renefer eyed Hani up and down with a considering expression on his jowly face. That face was a strange color, as if a pallid green had been laid over the copper of his Theban complexion. "Does he know about my resistance to orders? Is he wondering if he can trust me?" Hani asked himself. After the two men had sized each other up for a heartbeat, the vizier resumed. "2 reasons why you're here, my friend. One is, I have a commission for you in Dejahi, or maybe Karu, I forget which it is, but Tames will fill you in on the details. See him in Azati. And the other—" An ominous ripple of apprehension crawled up Hani's spine. "Our sun god Neferkepra Ranara, life, prosperity, and health be his, wants to recognize you. You're to be named master of the king's stable and receive the gold of honor." It was as if the floor had dropped out from under Hani. Of all the events in the world he'd never expected to happen, this was surely the most improbable. May the Hidden One protect me. Is this a sarcastic joke? He'd been a thorn in the king's flesh for years, criticizing the foreign policy of the two lands, uncovering a shady bit of political intrigue that Neferkepra would probably have preferred to keep hidden, and now he was to be honored? Suspicion smoldered like a banked fire in Hani's middle, but he only said, "The king's favor is the breath of my life in my nostrils, my lord. I fear I am unworthy." "Well, if by that you mean you know nothing about horses, that's not an obstacle," Renefer said dryly, as if Hani's protestations were an imposition. "The association with the cavalry is purely honorific, but some pompous title will give you more clout when you deal with our vassals in Karu, or was it Dejahi?" He suppressed a belch and patted himself on the chest with a fist. "Damn cucumbers!" Hani groped for words and finally managed, "I'm speechless, my lord." Renefer emitted a burble that might have been amusement, although his put-upon expression never brightened. "Don't be too speechless. We're counting on your eloquence in Dejahi." Or is it Karu? Hani thought up with the kind of giddy interior laughter of a man who has had his world overturned. And when is this honor to be bestowed, if I may make so bold, my lord? 2 weeks. That gives you time to get your people down here. Any questions, Hani? If not, that's all. Renefer rose, none too tall even on his feet. He hitched at the knot of his long kilt as if afraid it might all come sliding down, although Hani suspected the man's belly should hold it comfortably. Quite a difference from his late predecessor, the lean, hawk-faced Apparel. Hani bowed, glad the prostration hid his expression. He should have been wildly honored, but this was all too strange, and he couldn't help but wonder what lay behind his new designation. By the time he rose, the vizier had disappeared through his inner door, and Hani was left to totter like a man in shock back out to the reception hall. Maya popped up from his seat on the floor as soon as Hani had crossed the doorsill. The little secretary was bright-eyed with curiosity. Whatever posting Hani had received would affect him as well, and now he had a wife and 2 children, whom he would miss. And Hani would miss them too, because they were his grandchildren. What's the word, my lord? 2 things, son. 1, we're going to be missioned out to Karu again, or Dejahi. We're to stop by Azati, and Lord Patames will give us the details. Ah, said Maya cheerfully. It will be nice to see him again. It's been, 2 years? Yes, Hani said, as the 2 men breached the outer doorway and found themselves in the sun-bleached court. I wonder how he's doing in disgrace and exile. It would take more than being broken in rank to crush a proud man like Patames. What Hani really wondered was how Patames was doing after the loss of his wife, who had almost certainly been murdered. Because Hani had refused to exchange his family home in Waset, some 5 days to the south, for lodging in the new capital, Patames had graciously invited Hani and Maya to stay at his house when they were in Akhenaten. So they directed their mismatched footsteps down the broad, glaring processional street lined with lion-bodied images of the king. Hani, sunk in thought, remembered suddenly that he'd never completed his recital of the meeting. The second thing Renefer said was that I was to receive the gold of honor and the title Master of the King's Stable. He couldn't repress a bark of skeptical laughter. Maya stopped and gaped at his father-in-law. My lord, congratulations! At last they're recognizing all you've done for the 2 lands. But then his delight faded into a cocked eyebrow of suspicion. After the tomb robbery investigation, I'm a little surprised, though. This isn't a cruel joke, is it? I've asked myself the same thing, Maya. I guess we have to treat it as a serious offer. Perhaps the king has heard of how successfully I took care of Pippi's horses. Hani had to smile at the recollection of his brief stint as a groom after his irrepressible brother had bought out a pair of horses that turned out to have been stolen from the royal stud farm. Maya snorted, and the 2 of them strode along through the dust and the blare of cicadas, Hani revolving all the possibilities of what this unexpected royal favor might signify. At the southern edge of the city, the houses thinned out until only the mansions of the rich rose in white-walled splendor along the riverbank. As they entered Lord Patames's gate, Maya said, What sort of man is the new vizier of the lower kingdom, my lord? I don't have a grasp on him yet, Hani admitted. He seemed like a harmless fellow, a little befuddled, but I don't know how benevolent he is toward us. He was the one who rescinded Patames's commission, although perhaps he was under pressure from the great house. In appearance, he's the opposite of Lord Apparel. Maya made a thoughtful Lord Patames's servants came to the door to welcome Hani, who greeted them pleasantly. They knew him and his secretary well, since their master had made it clear that Hani should feel at home even in his own absence. Will my lord require anything to eat? The majordomo inquired politely, while the other servants, disciplined and smooth as one would expect, stood behind him, attending to his every wish. Hani and Maya exchanged an eager look. Thank you, my friend, Hani said to the majordomo, realizing all at once how hungry he was. That would be splendid. He beamed at the servant, who backed formally from the room and set off toward the kitchens. 2 weeks later, Hani found himself back in the capital, among a crowd of his family, friends, and colleagues. Several men were being honored simultaneously, so a processional road before the window of appearances was thronged with a festive crowd of well-wishers. Hani's wife, Nefer, was at his side, and all but one of their children, Becket Isset, who had been bedridden for 17 years, ever since a terrible accident who had left her paralyzed. Aha, Hani's firstborn, was there, proud of his father for once. Pakiki and his wife and child were present, along with Maya and Sethara, Hani's second girl. and the irrepressible youngest, Neferet, with her friend and fellow doctor Benarib, trailing her, was jumping up and down with excitement despite her 18 years. Hani's brother Pippi, who lived in Akhenaten, was at his side beaming, and Mary Ra, their father, smiling ear to ear, stood just behind him with his pupil, young Kawi. The family of Nupnefer's brother, the rebel priest of Amun-Ra, had even come. Hani saw in the crowd many of his friends and also Maya's mother, the goldsmith and Appy, almost invisible among the taller bodies around her. So many beloved faces. All these good people are here to wish me well. They're probably happier than I am about this. For the first time, Hani was conscious of what an honor this recognition was, rather than afraid of what hidden meaning it might be intended to convey. He resolved to suppress his suspicions and enjoy the moment. He gazed out over the clustered throng bedecked in their finest festival clothes and most expensive wigs, flowers around their necks and in their hair. Nupnefer hanging on his arms, looking up at him, her face glowing with pride. She had no love for the king, who had suppressed the cult of Amun-Ra and put his priests, including members of her family, out of work. But she believed in Hani's worth. Where would I have been all these years without her? Hani's nose sparked with tenderness. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, through the wreath of flowers that adorned it. "The greatest honor of all is to be seen with you, my dove," he whispered. She beamed up at him, as beautiful in Hani's eyes as she'd been the day they were married 33 years before. All at once, the silvery notes of trumpets rang out. The crowd rippled like a field of wind-tossed wheat as everyone bent in a full court bow before the king, Neferkapura Waranra, and his queen and co-regent, Nefertiti Neferu Aten, who had appeared in the window above the road. Slender columns with fluttering banners flanked them, so that the royal couple was framed like a pair of gods in a shrine. They were a dazzling apparition in their blue crowns. Clad in gauzy white linen and adorned with elaborate jewelry, almost every inch of the royal pair coruscated in the blinding midday sun, together the living avatar of the Aten, the sun disk. A herald proclaimed the names of those to be honored that day, each one greeted by the cheers of his supporters. The first man was raised onto the shoulders of his friends, and as he stretched out his arms in ritual supplication, the royal couple showered him with sacks of grain and cuts of meat and gold necklaces and armlets, as if the very bounty of the heavens had been upended upon him. His friends scrambled for the gifts and hung the gold shebu collars of honor around his neck, everyone laughing, eyeing, and crying out at once. And then came Hani's turn to be hoisted, rocking and uneasy, upon the shoulders of his father and brother and sons. His heart was pounding over the precariousness of his seat. He was not a light man, but he let go of Mary Ra's and Pipi's hands long enough to stretch out his hands to the royal couple above him. Over the bright, richly embroidered cushion that padded the sill of the window, the king leaned forward, his pointed face a benevolent and impassive mask, and gold and food began to rain down upon Hani, striking him like weighty hail, a not altogether pleasant sensation. He heard the excited cries of the family below him as they scrambled for the falling gifts, but he could hardly distinguish one bent back from another. As the men started to lower him to the ground, Hani caught the queen's eye. It was narrowed in an evaluating look, neither malevolent nor kindly. What's she thinking? Hani wondered with a chill. When his feet had reached solid ground once more, and the children had tied the last of the gold collars with lens-shaped beads around his neck, Hani, flushed and still off balance, laughed and embraced his wife. "Am I prettier with these things framing my chin?" he asked mischievously. He felt rather exhilarated in spite of himself. She was radiant, but a little tartness marked her tone as she said, "You deserve them, my love. You've deserved them for years. Anyone else would have honored you long before now, again and again." Hani wondered once more what this honor really meant. Perhaps it was only as Renefer had said, that the elevated status gave him more influence abroad. Still, the question passed through his mind. Is the king trying to buy me? But this was a day of celebration. His family gathered around him. Hani made his way toward the Embarcadero, where a ferry would take them back to Wasset. "Who's coming and who's staying?" he called out. "We're coming back with you," Neferet cried joyfully, hugging him hard. "Lady Japhet Nebti gave us some time off because the occasion was so special." Japhet Nebti was the royal son with whom Neferet and her friend were studying. An apologetic look on his face, Aha said, I'd like to join you, Father, but I have things to do here. He clapped his father on the shoulder in an awkward gesture of pride. Aha, more than any other member of the family, would be impressed by such superficial ceremonies. He was an enthusiastic follower of the king and his reforms, much to the chagrin of his parents. Thank you for coming, son. Hani embraced him. Give our love to Kenetka and their children. Having bade goodbye to Aha and all their friends who now resided in the city of the horizon, the rest of the family trooped down to the ferry they had retained. The servants, who stood grinning at the shore, sent up an enthusiastic cheer. Congratulations, my lord, the old gatekeeper cried. The others echoed him as Hani and his party clumped up the gangplank, their arms full of gold jewelry and haunches of meat and sacks of grain, their steps resounding on the boards. Maya was as proud as if he himself had received the gold of honor. He tried the words out for size in his mind. I am the secretary of the master of the king's stable. By all the gods, this would add spice to his tales. The traveler, secretary to the master of the king's table, was sent on a delicate mission, saved the king's life, single-handedly carried 20 little princes from a burning building, fought his way back to the capital in time with an urgent message. There were definite possibilities here. He found he was almost eager to head north again, despite the fact that it meant months away from his family. He was 32, but he still had a young man's thirst for adventures, especially now that he had discovered how successfully they fueled his storytelling, and how much that Haru and the children loved to hear about extravagant exploits. At his side, his wife gave a great sigh of contentment. Wasn't that marvelous? Papa deserves it. We've always wondered why he never got any recognition. Because he gets up the king's nose at every opportunity, Maya answered silently. Because he's honest and incorruptible, my love. He hasn't clawed his way up the ladder by pushing other people down. I wish we'd brought the children. Pakiki and Uncle Pippi did, and Aunt Anua. Little Teppy would have been thrilled to see his grandfather standing before the king. He's only 7, my dove. I'm not sure but all that waiting in the sun wouldn't have made him cranky. Maybe you're right. Her voice trailed off. It was clear she didn't think he was right. Maya replied in irritation. Of course I'm right. He looked away from Sathara and concentrated on the glorious river in front of him, gilded by the long rays of the afternoon sun, its waters like swirling malachite. He could only just see over the gunwales, and that peeved him too. On the distant bank, trees swayed, and now and again a village appeared and receded into the distance, a jumble of dun cubes looking as if they'd grown right from the dun soil. Farmers bent over their fields, setting up the sluice gates in their canals, readying for the inundation which would come upon them soon. That life-bringing flood of fresh, rich alluvium that gave Kemet, the Black Land, its name. When Maya turned back to his wife, she had gone.